Welcome back to another episode of Marketing Girly by Sky Society. Today I am chatting with Mirela Pajazetović. She is a retail consultant and previously the Senior Director of Global Retail Expansion at Alo Yoga for 6 years before starting her own consulting. Welcome, Mirela.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Of course, I'm so excited to jump into your journey and really just hear about the incredible experiences you've had building out the retail arm for incredible brands and just your journey into entering this area. But before we go into all of that fun stuff, can you start by telling me a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Of course. So I'm Mirela. I am actually originally from former Yugoslavia, presently known as Bosnia and Herzegovina. I was actually raised on the border of Bosnia and Croatia. So I lived there for 12 years. I'm a first generation immigrant. I moved here with my mom and, was lucky enough to have the opportunity to start over and build a new life in the US. We started in New York. We ended up in Southern California. And then I ended up actually going to school in Southern California. Long Beach State was where I graduated, and I actually mastered in communications, minored in marketing, and I worked in retail. That was the way that I pretty much was able to support myself through school. I ended up staying in this industry for a very long time. I acquired a lot of skills, which I'm really grateful for. I'm a dog mom, I'm a daughter, I'm a friend, and I love music, I love art, and that pretty much sums it up.
I love it. I'm excited to talk about your journey, especially coming from someone who is an immigrant. I'm sure that brought its own challenges for you having to pave your way. And then also I think it's really, really impressive that I think there's a lot of people that have that desire to want to work in retail, but not everybody can do it in the capacity that you have in your career, right? I think a lot of us might get stuck I know you have your experience working at boutiques, but you've truly done some incredible things throughout your career, which again, like I said, super excited to jump into, but we're going to start with Alo because I know that's your most previous role, and then we'll kind of go back and talk about how you even ended up in a position like this. I know you mentioned to me that the founders are the ones that originally hired you when Alo only had just a couple of store locations, or like they had a couple, right? Or none at that
Yes,
time?
they had 6 at the time.
Six.
Yes, they had
Okay, and then
6.
how many does Alo have now?
They have 106.
Oh my
I believe
gosh.
107. I think they opened another one just this past month, but 106, and that is only company-owned locations. So there's also franchise locations in different countries. I mean, definitely a lot of this expansion has happened in the last couple of years.
Amazing. Okay, before you tell us what you did at Alo, can you even just tell us what it means to do global retail expansion or retail expansion in general? Because not everybody might even know that that's a career path that's out there.
Well, I think it's something that, evolved into that. So, I think it's important just for context to back up. I started with Alo when they just needed a proof of concept. They had 6 stores. I actually was referred by somebody that used to work for me, and she was one of their first managers for one of their first locations. And when I met with the founders, they had these 6 stores. These stores had been open over a 4-year period, and they were doing well, but I think that they hadn't quite seen the response that they expected, or didn't necessarily know kind of the path to take it forward. They were passionate about it. They believed in their mission and vision, as did I once I met with them, because I could tell that they were just wellness enthusiasts. I think they really were such brand ambassadors, and that's ultimately what I connected with the most. But they didn't necessarily, off of these 6 locations, have that proof of concept, or even the belief that it could become something bigger. And most of if actually all of my background is in retail, and I love that stage of any business because I love to go in and obviously look at what we're doing and where are some of the inefficiencies and what can we do differently and what are some of those controllables, but also bring in some of my network. And a lot of that's taken time to really build out and show that there's so much potential. And I was an Alo customer before I even worked for the brand, and I remember going to their first location. I'm like, I actually don't mind paying full price. And for somebody that has worked in this industry for over 20 years, generally I don't want to pay full price for And I loved the product so much and I saw so much potential, but I also saw a lot of opportunities as a shopper. And that's usually how I really assess businesses, and that's how I look at anywhere I go, is like, if I'm a customer, like, what is my experience? How does this translate? Because if I'm feeling it, somebody else is. And there's always so many controllables. And I think that's ultimately what's led me to really be passionate about consulting, is that there's so many opportunities and controllables within the four walls that ultimately can not only elevate the experience, but can, allow you to generate more revenue, create better customer connections, really transform the business. And that's really where this Alo was at that stage. So I joined actually a few months prior to the pandemic.
I was going to ask you what happened in the pandemic when retail was closed for a little bit.
So, we had to shut down, as did everybody else. It was an extremely challenging time because I had stepped in a couple of months prior and I had brand new teams in these stores, and they were just working their way on being bought into me as a new leader. And then we have to now go through this process of transition, and it's uncertain. So, I think what I really appreciated is the company, I had their full support. Marco, Danny, they were just definitely very supportive, and they partnered with me on that process. I didn't think that at that point I had only been with the company for a couple of months. So it was very uncertain for me if I was going to remain in that role or if we were just going to put a pause on everything. And I did end up, obviously staying with the company. We went through that whole process. We had to shut down. We dealt with obviously all of the challenges that every other retailer did at that time. But it also allowed me to, really have that moment to step back and be like, okay, once we open, what do we want to focus on? And really at that time, it was like, people have been isolated for X amount of time. They're going to want to come shop. But then there's going to be restrictions. When we first opened, we couldn't let a lot of people into the stores. They had to wear masks. We had to do that. So we really worked on creating the best possible experience we can. I was able to bring back some of the original team members. I brought in some of great leaders. And I think for me, it was important to have leaders that really understood the business and had that retail background, but also were really passionate about health and wellness and could connect to that. Because, I always say when you're somebody that's primarily shopped the brand online, which at that time most customers had only really known about Alo if they knew about it online, you have a certain level of expectations of what you get when you come in the store. And our job is to exceed those expectations. So, I think we started small and very conservative, and then we were able to kind of build out as traffic picked up, as there was more momentum. And, I think that year just alone, even though it was very challenging and we were closed down, we had a fantastic year. We saw a significant increase in revenue for those 6 stores. And that ultimately became kind of the stamp of okay, we can do more. And then that's ultimately what led to the path of wanting to open more stores and wanting to expand. And some of that happened only I think the first 3 years, we only opened about, I think we landed about 13 stores in the first 2-3 years. And then it really ramped up the last couple of years. So initially I was overseeing all aspects of the retail business. There was nobody to really, help with that or focus on that. And because it wasn't necessarily something that was at a stage of us wanting to take it forward and really expand. And then when they saw the opportunity and the potential of retail and wanting to make those investments, then we started building out different departments. Then we started to really focus on expanding, which led to 3 years later, we had a COO that stepped in, and her and I really worked on how do we continue to build this forward? In that time, we started I assembled the NSO team, which I new store opening team. And for me, it was really important to have team members that came from the stores because they're relatable. They have worked in the 4 walls. When you open stores, you need to understand the operations of the business. You need to understand how to help the team. And you also have to inspire and give them something to work and look forward to, which they were ultimately those representations for us, and they were fantastic. And so when I transitioned to just focus on expansion, it was all of the store openings with that team. But in the recent year, it was also standing up our first international market which was in the UK, and that was company owned. So the last year, it was kind of a two-part, standing up our UK doors and also opening the stores with the rest of the team.
What a journey at Alo that you've had. Oh my goodness. So really getting to start from first optimizing the in-store experience, and then once you've kind of proven that concept, it looks like you got to lead the expansion and growth of all of the other stores, which is so inspiring to hear. I'm also curious, Mirela, because one of my favorite things on the podcast is getting to hear perspectives of businesses that us as everyday consumers don't have, right? So I might walk into Alo, for example, which I've walked into Alo many times, and I might shop and try things on, but I'm likely not seeing it from your perspective, right? You have this unique perspective. So can you maybe share in those like early years what you were seeing? Like, what is your brain, like how does it think with this, special eye that you have? And then what are some of the changes that you implemented to really kind of how you were mentioning how your goal is really to exceed expectations when people walk into the store? Just because, again, I'm someone that probably takes advantage of that experience because I don't really know what goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think the focuses really depend on what stage you are as a business. And it's interesting because as we started to grow and then we started to build out these different departments and we had all these team members to join the team, in those early discussions, they would, come to us and be like, how do you not have this? And how do you not have that? And I'm like, it wasn't a necessity at that stage, but now we have proven ourselves and we're at a place that we can afford the additional investments. And this is why you're here and helping us build out the framework for these other programs and processes and the support that's needed. So in the early stages, I think for me as a customer, as I mentioned, I discovered Alo before I joined the team. I was a customer. I loved the product, but I had only shopped in the Beverly Hills location. And then I moved to New York because at that time I was working for Theory, and that was another, I think notable moment in my career. I was with Theory for 6 years, and I had relocated with Theory, and I was living in New York City. There wasn't an Alo in New York City at that time. And I would order online, and I had such a great experience online. Like, the packaging was great. We'd get there within 2 days. I loved it because it was a flex for me because nobody else was wearing it at that time. I was also going through like a yoga certification program. So all the girls in my class would ask about Alo. I would tell them about how great it was. It was only in LA. And then when I moved back from New York, I saw that they had opened the Grove location, and I went in there, and I was honestly so disappointed with the service because there was just so many opportunities, and I'm coming in all eager and excited and wanting to shop and having I have money to shop, so that was something that really kind of stuck with me. And I remember walking out that day, and this is when Alo wasn't even on the radar for me to come and join the team. And I remember walking out and thinking, gosh, they have so much potential. I hope they find that unlock. So fast forward, when I joined, I think, especially having to go through the pandemic and then having to manage the teams and be really sensitive because of that, the time we were in and how difficult it was for the teams to go through. I mean, it's not easy to manage a business as is, and then you're managing it with all these restrictions. And, I think there was just a heightened anxiety around that time. There were so many unknowns. So really the priority at that time was, how do we really create a great guest experience? We want to be efficient. Yes, we want to have, the processes we need at that time, but, we want to really be hyper focused on the guest experience. We want to make sure we have beautifully merchandised stores, that they feel good, that it exudes wellness, and that we are, setting it up in a way that people actually feel really comfortable and want to connect with our team and they want to spend time here. So that was really, I think, super important in that stage. And then just really fleshing out things that, there was a lot of misalignment between the stores in terms of what should we be focusing on? What processes should we be adapting? What's important? We had some inventory to clean up, but really I think you have to adapt your strategy based on where you are as a business. And at that time, it was really just about, we want to build teams that are passionate about this brand. We want to have strong leaders that are going to take care of those teams, that are going to be collaborative, work together. And then we want to create great environments that customers, if they're on our site and they've never been to a store, it matches, if not exceeds their expectations. And when they go on the website and they come in the store, they're like, this is great. And then it was an evolution. And obviously, with every year, as we grew and as we added new departments and new team members, of course, operations was something that really had to become a focus. You're scaling the business, so you have to make sure that you implement systems and processes, and that's the only way you can scale. You have to become more efficient. But in those beginning stages, it was really just making sure that there's alignment, making sure that the teams that are there for the right reasons, and we're just creating a great experience, and we merchandise these stores to really feel like those sanctuaries that they are and they can be. And I think that's really what was the unlock at that stage.
Yeah, and is there any specific example that you can maybe share that someone listening that's maybe walked into an Alo store, whether it is the fact that the associate comes up to you and asks you if you're looking for anything, or whether it's the fact that clothing is displayed or located in a different area that you helped, just to give us like a tangible example of, I can hear your excitement about all of those changes, but just that maybe somebody listening that has been to an Alo store can like recognize that, oh, maybe that's one of the changes that contributed to this positive experience they're having at the store.
Yeah. Well, when I started, we didn't even have a guide on like sales and service. And I remember asking somebody, I'm like, well, so what do we do when customers come in? And, the girl, she was like, one of the associates, she was like, oh, we just let them do their thing and, come to us for help. And I'm like, oh, we gotta, change that a bit. I've also, when I was with Theory, I stood up the learning and development department there too. So I'm really big, I'm super passionate about learning and development. I'm super passionate about training. I think that if you don't set up your team for success, you will never see the potential, the results that you'll see in stores. So that was also when we started to really build out the framework of, for even just the sales and service model. So initially when I started, like, well, I have a background in this. I already have the tools. So I gave them the framework of like, this is the expectation. When customers come in, what do we do when they walk in? What do we do during the middle of the journey? How do we assist and like help them out when they're in the fitting rooms? What does the checkout look like? So that was one of the first priorities, because that ultimately impacts the guest experience. Then from a visual standpoint, there wasn't any consistency at that time. So it was really important for us. We had some managers and team members that were so talented that were underutilized in the store. And we didn't necessarily have a budget at that time that we could build out a retail visual team or even field team. So we really had to lean in. And I think one of my specialties, because I grew up in the store, is I love to find talent in the store and leverage them, because ultimately it sets them on a path to next as we continue to grow. And then we actually have a budget that we can make those investments. So really leveraging those talented team members that we had in stores to help us put together a visual guide, and then you have something to follow, that there is that consistency. As I mentioned earlier, cleaning up the inventory. I think there was definitely some inefficiencies in the way we were doing transfers. Some stores had too much products. Some stores didn't have enough products. Sizing was an opportunity. So in the early stages, it was really addressing those areas, because those were controllables and things that we could see an immediate ROI on as we continue to build towards like what would evolve into present day Alo.
And Girl, hearing you talk about it, I can just see how much of an expert you are in this niche. And I think it's time for us to kind of rewind and talk about like how you even got into this specific area. I know a lot of our listeners really, really love fashion and really want to work in the fashion industry. So I can imagine working in retail for a lot of them. Maybe doing something similar that you've done in your career would be really, really exciting. But I know this isn't exactly where you started. So can you take us back a little bit to the start of your career and how you even got into this space in the first place?
Absolutely. I actually, one of my first jobs was with BB. For any of your listeners that might have heard of it, I was a sales associate for BB, and I was 16 years old. I was still in high school. They weren't actually supposed to hire me at that time, because their requirement is that you had to be 18. But the managers that interviewed me really took a liking to me and how excited I was, and I loved the product. So they had restrictions with me. I had to go home at a certain time. I couldn't stay for the late overnight shifts. I couldn't stay past, I think it was like 9 o'clock at that time. And, but they hired me. And I think I was like making $12 an hour, and I thought that was amazing at
That's
that
a
time.
lot when you, I feel like now the minimum wage is around that for most states, so that's a
And
lot.
I was so thrilled. And of course, all of my money went to clothes because I loved BB. And so I actually started in San Diego. I finished high school in San Diego, and I ended up applying to San Diego State and Long Beach State, and I got accepted to both. I decided to go to Long Beach State, and I was able to transfer with BB. So all throughout college, I worked for BB as a sales associate. They had a fantastic commission program. Honestly, it was some of my most memorable moments. I met great friends through the process, and I really learned a lot. I think BB had such a great structure in place for their leadership team, and eventually I learned that because I went into management with them. But they had great training programs. They really had a way of like building this cult-like following that at that time you wanted to be in that and you wanted to be part of it. So I put myself through college working in retail. I ended up initially going in as a business major and quickly learned there was way too many math classes, and I wasn't as enthused about those, nor did I think I had to take that many math classes to be a business, manager. So I ended up switching my major, and I majored in communications with a minor in marketing. And that was ultimately what, I was really connected with. And I thought I was going to do that when I finished school. So fast forward, I graduate and I'm interviewing with different marketing firms, and I'm interviewing with these different companies for communication roles. And the starting salary was a fraction of what I made at that time because I was on this great commission program. I was making all this money, and I live in Los Angeles, and I live by, I had a roommate at that time. But I remember looking at these hiring managers and I'm like, who can afford to live like this? Like, I can't afford to support myself. Like, I understand, like, I believe in working hard and making the investment, but on this salary, unless I lived at home and had no overhead, that's the only way I would make that happen. And for those that can do that, I think it's still a great experience, and it's good to get your foot in the door. For me, unfortunately, that just wasn't an option at that time, and I wasn't able to take that significant of a pay cut. So I actually went back to BB, and I was like, well, let me go into management. I've done the sales, and I learned so much. I started as a key holder, worked my way up to assistant manager, and I definitely learned a lot through that process. And as I was doing that, I worked in every LA location. My last one was on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. And one of my previous managers from BB, she bought a boutique in Huntington Beach, and she couldn't hire a lot of, employees. She could hire one, which was me. And she was like, can you come and just be my counterpart? I need help buying. I need help promoting. I need help managing the shop. I'll pay you above what you're making now. I just need some help standing this up. So I did that for a year. And it was a great experience. I don't live in Orange County. I had no plans in working in Huntington Beach. I really just did it for her because I really respected her a lot and believed in her vision. So that was also a great experience because I got to go with her and buy for the shop. And I did all the merchandising and any of the promotions or the marketing outreach. I'd get to partner with her. So it was definitely great learning for me to do that with her. And while I was working with her, I was still living in LA, commuting down
Oh
to
my gosh,
help
that's
her
such a
out.
far commute.
Yes, and during that time, someone from Neiman Marcus had reached out to me, and they were opening a new location, actually in Canoga Park, and they were looking for different roles, and I never thought of myself as a department store type of employee, I guess. Nothing against department stores. It just was not something that was ever on my radar. But I was really intrigued with like how they structured their onboarding process, all the different brands you would be exposed to, the things that you can really gain from that experience. So I ended up doing that I actually did join the team. I did that for about a year, learned a lot. I was in the contemporary department. I was one of the coordinators. I just did not love that setting. I loved how much I learned about luxury brands and contemporary brands and all of the different workshops they offered. It just wasn't necessarily what connected with me. And then I decided to take a little break, which I to this day refer to as like my mid-20 little life reset. So one of my mom's friends is actually an artist. She lives in Frankfurt, Germany. So I went to stay with her for 2.5 months.
Oh
And
my gosh. Can you tell me like what? Because leaving the country and going someplace, that's one to go take like a trip to another state. Like you left the country. So what made you feel like, oh my gosh, I need to go do this now?
so I'm someone that really believes in like when you get to a point where you feel like you're just going through the motions. And it's interesting because I feel like I'm going through a similar journey present day, but I feel like when I get to a point, I really am someone that listens to myself. And, thankfully I've had a really supportive mother that's supported a lot of my kind of dreams and aspirations and let me try things multiple times. But I think when you get to a point where you feel like you're on autopilot, and you feel stuck and you're not inspired, and it's like there's that voice that you keep suppressing that keeps telling you like there's more, and you're not listening to it.
Yeah.
You have to either take that leap yourself or you're going to be pushed to take that leap, which has happened multiple times throughout my life. And I think at that time, I knew I didn't want to be an Neiman Marcus, but I didn't know what else I wanted to do. And I didn't want to do what I was doing, in that position, but I didn't know what that next chapter was. So I decided to just take a break after, contemplating for a bit. One of my best friends, who's still my best friend to this day, she actually took over my lease for my apartment. I put my things in storage and I ended up going to Frankfurt. I was there for 2.5 months. I stayed with my mom's good friend and she has this art studio. She taught art classes and I spent 2.5 months with 60-plus-year-olds painting and just figuring out how do I proceed. And I'm super grateful because I think for me, I'm definitely been an old soul. And so even that experience like allowed me to just take a moment to recalibrate and get inspired and figure out what I wanted to do next. So I moved back and, I went back to BB because BB's like, they'll always take me back with welcome arms. And I'm grateful for that. And I was at the Century City location and I ended up getting recruited to go to Kitson. And Kitson was at its prime at that time. For any of your listeners that are familiar with Kitson, they had their location on Robertson Avenue. They had all of this, obviously, kind of hype about being like the celebrity destination. They carried all these different brands. And so I ended up going to Kitson. I was with Kitson for 2 years until I was recruited to go to Theory. And Theory, actually, the interview process, I was flown out to New York and I met with Andrew Rosen, the founder of Theory, and it was just for a general manager position at that time. And there was just something that I think we connected on and he was just wonderful and inspiring and he signed off to hire me and I started with the company, was able to really show them that they could be successful on the West Coast, and that opened up an opportunity for me to build out the first learning and development department for them and stand that up for them with one of my counterparts. And then I ended up moving to New York. And because of the L&D success, there was an opening to oversee the East Coast division for Theory. So I moved and I lived in New York City. I was overseeing all the city stores, Hamptons, Miami, and did that for about a year plus. And then the lifestyle just wasn't for me. I love New York. I love visiting New York, but I am a health and wellness enthusiast day in and day out in my personal life. That's what I love to do. That's what it's just ultimately my passion. So I decided to move back to LA. I hosted some wellness events during that, time that I took. And one of my contacts from Theory, actually, she went to MedMen, the cannabis company, and she called me and she was like, they need help building out their hospitality program. And I'm like, I don't know anything about cannabis. That's not my space. And she's like, but people and experience, you could do this. So I spent some time working, with them to build out all of their training documents and their hospitality program. And during that time, I got a call from Danny, actually, first, from Alo. He's one of the co-founders, and we spoke on the phone, and And then I met with him and Marco in person, and we had a 4-hour interview in person with, I wouldn't even call it an interview, it was more of a discussion on all things retail and what they were doing and what they were passionate about. I met their head of design, Abby, who had been with them for a long time, and on my way home, Danny called me and offered me the position. And
Oh my
6 years later, this
goodness.
is where we're at.
Okay, well, first, what a journey. That is absolutely incredible just to hear you lay it out all like that. And the thing that kind of is sticking out with me, I want to go back to the beginning when you were applying to these jobs that you're supposed to have, right?
Yeah.
You got the degree, you're supposed to get these types of jobs, and you realized, I don't actually think that's the path for me. I can make more money doing something else. Can you go back to that, or just any advice for somebody who is in that position? Because I know a lot of entry-level marketing jobs specifically, not for all companies, but for some companies, like, really don't pay a lot, and you kind of have to make that choice of like, do I want to do this, or do I want to take a different path that's going to pay me more? Or do you have any advice for someone that's potentially in a similar situation?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it all depends on your circumstance. As I said, for me, as much as I wanted to do that, and I believe that there was probably a lot of great experience I could have gained from working for those companies, I wasn't in a position to do that. There would not be a way to support myself. I do think that if you have, an opportunity and it might not pay X amount, but you see potential that you can learn a lot and get exposure, and it could be, a good starting point to really build out your path, and you have an option to live at home, or you can, obviously scale back on your monthly bills and overhead. I think that you really have to pursue what is realistic for you and what you connect with the most. I think experience is great in any setting that you get it. Sometimes we have to put ourselves in different settings to really identify what's right for us. And, I think for me, I took the path of working in the retail stores because that was funding my lifestyle, but I still learned a lot. It took, obviously time. And, I definitely am someone that, I think I've always been very driven, and I've initiated a lot of this for myself, but I learned a lot about different aspects of the business from working in this industry. But not to say that you can't learn a lot from working in other settings as well. But, I think all decisions we make are really based on what do I need as an individual, and how do I take care of myself and feel secure? And that looks different for everybody, and I think also not being discouraged. I mean, you have to start somewhere. I think right now, especially with like pay transparency and, in certain states, like, I do think that it could be discouraging if you're a first timer and you're like, oh, well, these positions pay X amount, but I don't have the experience, but I'm starting at this point. But everyone started somewhere. We all start at point A and we work our way, and some it takes obviously, faster, I think, to get there, and some maybe not, but your path is your path. I think something that also was super beneficial for me is that I knew when it was time to take a chance on something else, or when that chapter ended for me and I needed to move on to the next. And also, I think getting out of my comfort zone and taking these chances really allowed me to open up certain doors, not only for myself, but for others in the process, and get to certain levels that I did by taking a more non-traditional route.
And then one thing, like with your career, I know I kind of touched on or brought this up at the beginning. Not everybody who works in retail goes on to have a career like yours. And so I know a part of it is because you are brilliant. However, I think there are also likely some other things that you did within your career, because I think all of us might know people who are really capable, but that might be stuck in a role and they have maybe greater potential, but fulfilling that is hard. And I know specifically with retail, like not everybody that works retail goes on to do this. So what do you think is your either your secret or something that you feel like has just really, really helped you take these leaps and these opportunities and just have such growth in your career and not just remain, a retail associate for the entirety of your career?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, we work in the roles that we're in and we wait for somebody to notice that we're good in these roles and then to give us an opportunity to do something else. And I think you have to do that for yourself before somebody else can tap you on the shoulder and be like, hey, do you want to do this? And so something I think that's, at least for myself personally, has worked really to my benefit. I always took on more with no guarantees that I was going to go into any other position, because I'm somebody that, if I see that there's an opportunity, I mean, my work ethic, and maybe this is just my upbringing and, my roots, is on another level. Like, I like to stay busy. I like to do more. If I see that there's an opportunity to, create like a better process or present a solution, like, I'm very vocal about that, and I'm very forthcoming with those. But every position I was in, I always worked on a level that the position that I wanted to be in. So when I was a sales associate, I always volunteered to take on more responsibilities, which ultimately opened up the door for me to become, a key holder and then an ASM. I was always willing to go above and beyond and take more, and was vocal about it. Like, I'm happy to help with this, or I see that this is something that we could create. Are you open to that? And even when I was a general manager, I think for me, I mean, that's ultimately what opened the door for me to go into learning and development and have this great opportunity to stand up a program for a company that's never done it before. Is, I had a really great team that I had built out, but that took time. I took a year and a half to build out this fantastic team, and everyone was clear on roles and responsibility. Everyone was engaged. We had great processes. We were running a really great business. We, we're seeing fantastic results. Like, it was a well-oiled machine, and that allowed me to step back as their leader and still be that support for them, but then take on more. Oh, you have a new store opening and they need to be trained so they can run as efficiently. I can do it. I'll go and help because my team is in a good place and they can manage this business in my absence. I think a lot of times as leaders, it's validating if we're there and we have good results, because it's like, well, I'm here, so that's why we're doing X, Y, and Z. But actually, a true reflection of a leader is, if I step away, can you deliver the same results? Can you have the same experience? If you can, that means I've set you up for success. Are you empowered? Are you excited? Are you engaged? And so I think for me, the reason I was able to, kind of knock down a lot of these doors is because I was always willing to take on more, but there wasn't any guarantees. And for me, I'm somebody that I'm very curious. I want to figure out how to make things better and more efficient, because that ultimately contributes to me having a better experience and my team having a better experience. So I'm willing to do that. So, I mean, I think a lot of people start in retail as a way to make some extra money, maybe get some cute clothes, or depending on what, retail setting they're in, and don't necessarily see that there could be a trajectory for them to really get to certain levels. But, I think it depends on what you want as an individual, what ultimately drives you, but you also have to be willing to take on more and understand that sometimes it's not guaranteed for you to get something out of it, but it's also through that belief that if you can become the master of it, people will come to you to figure out how to replicate that and, and create something for you.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's applicable for any role. And again, just like how you said, I think a lot of people, specifically in retail, use it as a way to make money in between doing something else, or for a little while until they go on to do something else. And not everybody might consider that you can have a full career within that space. But still, that advice for any employee to do more than what you're asked and take on that extra responsibility. And honestly, like you said, like, for your own learning at the end of the day, I always say this, like, you can get fired from any job at any time, but they can always take your job title, but they can't take the experience that you built for yourself at that role. And same with your journey. Your education, I'm sure, gave you a strong foundation, but it didn't teach you how to do most of the things. 90% of the things you've done in your career. And a lot of that just kind of comes from learning on the job and getting that experience.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think I was actually talking to one of my friends about this just recently, where I'm like, 90% of what I've acquired and all the skills that I've been able to learn, and like how is all through applying them and being and actually getting out there and working in these different settings. Like, I think school is great and it gives you a good starting point, but you still have to apply it and you have to get into these settings And you also have to learn that you're going to go through these experiences, and some are going to be great and some are going to be not so great. And some, like, you'll be rewarded, and some you'll be super disappointed, or to your point, you're going to get hired and maybe fired. And you learn through all those experiences, but it also helps shape not only who you become as an individual, but also helps you better identify what path to take. I think retail setting is a perfect example of that. I've hired team members where they've started as maybe sales associates or cashiers, and they end up doing something completely different over time. But it's also through exposure that you have to put them in different settings and see, like, what lights them up, what do they connect with the most, where do they add the most valuable kind of contribution for the business and also for themselves and the team. And through that, you help kind of shape like where they go next. And I think that's really important, and that's why I think leadership shouldn't be taken lightly. We have a big responsibility to mentor team members and really help them kind of figure out what their path will be.
I love that. I also, on this leadership note, because I've also noticed a thread in your career is that you've managed a lot of people, especially even just setting up retail. I'm sure there's so many people that are a part of that. Do you have any advice for somebody who is newer to a leadership role, or they're not in a leadership role and they want to become a leader? What are some of the qualities that you see in good leaders that you brought onto your teams?
Yeah, I think obviously experience again ultimately will, put you on a path to work towards that. But I do think that you truly have to care and want to manage others and with no expectations of like getting something in return. I do think that, leadership can be really rewarding, but at times it can be very challenging and frustrating. The part that I love is that you get the ability to not only shape somebody's path, but share your expertise and influence, where they end up in their career. And that part of it has always been the most rewarding for me. And I've had team members that have loved their experience working for me, and maybe some that haven't, because maybe we just weren't on the same page. But ultimately what I try to do, and I think what every leader, it's so important, is to be consistent, to be open and ask for feedback, to know that it's something that, you kind of fine tune your approach with experience and time, and you're not going to have all the answers. It's okay to ask for help, and also to just invest in your own development and learning, seek out mentors, seek out certain self-development books, leadership books, like things that could really help you be more present and become that best version of yourself and become that leader for your team. I think it's trial and error sometimes, like sometimes you get it right, other times not so much, but learn from those experiences that you don't get it right, because that ultimately will help you for future scenarios or roles that you step in.
Yeah, it's not a leader's job to be perfect, and
No,
you don't need to be
and
perfect.
nobody is. None of us are. It doesn't matter if you're a VP or if you're a sales associate, none of us are perfect. No.
No. All right, Mirela, my last question for you, do you have any advice you'd like to share with the women who maybe want to have a career path like yours someday?
Yeah, I think, stay true to who you are, be authentic. I think that's something that I've always really made sure that I have like instilled in anybody that I've worked with, but also just kept kind of reminding myself through the journey. I think that there's so many distractions in this world, especially present day. And, we're told to act this way or think that way or speak a certain way. And I think it's important to take bits and pieces from that, but really find your voice and who you are as woman and what you want to accomplish, but also know that you're not going to have the answers right away because you're just starting out, or if you're midway through your journey, you're learning, and it's okay if you fall down, get back up. But I think just staying authentic and true to yourself is something that is super important. Remain curious, seek out the information, seek out, mentors and things that could really help you get on a path that you feel excited about and find that purpose and calling that you're looking for.
I love that. What an incredible note to end this episode. Thank you so much, Mirela, for walking us through your career journey and sharing all your insights. It has been so much fun chatting with you, and I've learned so much, so thank you.
I appreciate it. And thank you for doing what you're doing. I think it's exciting, and at your age to be starting out this community and giving a platform to young women is super important. And I think you're going to be super successful. So best of luck to you.
Oh, that means the world to hear. Thank you so much.
Thank you.